Well, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Joe Lambert. I'm not used to talking with a microphone, so bear with me. Give you a little background on me. I am a research scientist over in the geology department. I'll talk more about this here in a second, but I did my master's and PhD work here at Alabama. So I've got a little bit of history with Farrah Hall. I took a GIS class maybe in 2001 or so, and I think the computers were 200 megahertz back then. So this lab's a whole lot better than what I had almost 20 years ago now. Let me also mention that everything I'm going to present today is going to be available to you on a UA Dropbox or a box. We're working on that now. So don't worry about taking notes to the PowerPoint or anything like that. So I did my undergrad at Millsaps College, a little bitty school in Mississippi, about 1,200 people. I started off in accounting, and accounting didn't go too well. I did great in school until I got to accounting, and my Geology 101 professor said I looked like a geologist. Now I said, well, where do I sign up? And here I am 20 years later, still doing it. But I did want to mention my work here at Alabama. I think that's important for me to mention in that I've been in your shoes before. If you're a student now, I've been there. I've pulled the long nights. I've done the research, fought it through proposals, whether it be for the department or a grant proposal. And I made it through, luckily. Some people might argue that, but I made it through. And last week, in preparation for today, I dug up this diagram from my thesis proposal from 2001, and it may have been one of the very first figures I ever made in my life, as far as for school at least. And I'm pretty sure I made it in paint. And I show that just to kind of show that I think that we all end up in the same spot where we have a lot of training and maybe how to write, a lot of training and this and that, but when we get into grad school and we're asked to make a poster or some type of PowerPoint presentation, we don't have that fundamental training with those programs or even how to present the data clearly and so forth. Okay. And I'll ask you here in a second. I'll ask more questions about what software y'all are using. But nowadays, I'm using I run the Stable Isotope Lab. Luckily, a lot of that machinery is computer automated, so I can get away from the lab and do things like this. I also teach Geology 101 as well. If you've not seen the movie, one of the Taken movies, this is not going to make any sense to you at all. But it's a little meme I put together. My students got a kick out of it. But I basically have about, almost 20 years now of experience working with programs like, obviously, PowerPoint, but Photoshop, Adobe Illustrator. And I've been through all the hard times. I've been through times where I couldn't figure out how to make a figure. The software crashed, the export didn't work right, the printing didn't work right. But over 20 years, I've basically kind of developed a little bit of a knack to get through that. And I always somehow became the person that people came to when they needed help with Illustrator or printing a poster. So a few years ago, I put a class together, and we'll talk more about that here in a second, just to try to streamline kind of the transfer of some of my experience to others. And what I want to show today is not going to be about making a poster look fluffy and pretty or trying to make bad data look better. This is going to be more about making the message that you're trying to communicate be very efficient as you're transferring that knowledge. And then also, let me ask you this: how many of y'all have too much free time? All right, that's the luckiest man in the room right there. Good question. So the second part of this, and I'll mention this more here in a minute, but if it takes you, let's say, 10 hours to get through a poster, if you can get through it in 5, that's 5 extra hours that you have available to work on something else. This other thing too is when you are at a conference, so here's a big conference coming up for all the geography people down in New Orleans. You're going to have thousands of people there. You've got one of thousands of posters. When somebody stops by, you may only have a couple of minutes to catch their attention. And so, a lot of my logic with the way I teach the class that I've got going is similar to the 3-minute thesis mindset in terms of simplification, avoiding using jargon, making sure you're communicating with in the right way with the audience that you have, and things like that. So all that said, I ended up coming up with a class. This is the best name I could come up with, visual presentation for geologists. I've taught that particular class 3 semesters now. And the idea, and this is a tough part of it, is I'll have some people in the class that have worked with Illustrator for years, have made multiple posters. I have some students that have never opened Illustrator a day in their life. So we kind of start with the basics and work through. In this case, last year we did a final project where everybody printed off a poster and we presented over in Smith Hall. And I love teaching that class. And we try to do it every couple of years if we can, just to catch a new set of grad students as they roll through. So I'm a big fan of Adobe Illustrator. I know some people might use Canvas. I know some people use PowerPoint. But let me hear from y'all for a second. What type of programs do y'all typically use to draft either a figure or a poster? Is there a general, is it kind of split a good bit or what? PowerPoint? For posters? Okay. I'm just starting to get into InDesign. I like it so far. We'll talk about that here in a second. Yeah, PowerPoint is going to be very, very popular. A lot of times people are already familiar with that, with a set of tools within PowerPoint. If you've used Word before, and of course, I remember days of presentations with transparencies, but a lot of people have used PowerPoint, and it's also relatively cheap. I mean, it's $120. It used to be like $120 for the whole package. Illustrator can be very, very expensive. Of course, as a grad student, I guess as long as you're a GTA, it's totally free. So it's a good benefit right there. All right, so when you're using these programs, whichever program it is, what typical issues do y'all run into? Or does it just go perfectly smooth from beginning to end? Yep. And Illustrator too is a very memory, intensive program. You can end up with files that might be 500 megabytes, or 1,000, or almost a gig in some cases. All right, what else? That's the next slide. Yes, that's a whole. I guess its own page. What else? Yep. Anything else? Yep. Here is just a few things that I've observed. And I think the first one kind of goes, hopefully the first one applies mainly to the new grad student that's just started with a poster. They might say, hey, I've got this conference in New Orleans in 2 weeks. I'm going to start tomorrow and be done like that. It can take hours and hours and hours to finish in some cases. It can also be very challenging to not put too much text. You want to write and write and write and write. That's what a paper is for. Okay, if you want to write a lot, you can come write my papers. I'll be glad. I'll take you to lunch. I'll be glad to do that. But sometimes it's hard to get, you want to put a lot of text in there, and then by default, if you want to squeeze more text in, you make the text smaller, and then you can't read the text to start with, or it makes it more difficult for somebody to read. I'll talk more about this here in a second, but we also have a hard time with the amount of content. We want to put every figure that we've ever drafted onto that poster, especially when you're at your end of your graduate career. You've been working on this thesis for 4 years, 7 years, whatever it happens to be. It might be a challenge to not put everything on the poster. And then especially with like Adobe Illustrator, you might run into, I have no clue, I need to do this, but I have no clue how to do it. Or I can do this, but there's got to be a quicker way. We've put man on the moon 40 years ago. Surely there's an easier way to do this. And I personally went. I remember one thing in Illustrator where I was trying to align some objects. I was trying to align some objects, and it took forever. And then somebody showed me there's a button that does that for you. Yet I got a PhD somehow. All right, so let's get into the printing issues. So we've talked about the colors don't seem to work right on the final output, and then just general print or have printing issues. What other printing issues have y'all run into? Yes, and it's probably on photo paper too, right? Yep. And that goes back into, I'm trying to cram everything in. I'm going to maximize my working area. Anything else? Yep. Anything else? I've seen it all. I've got a pretty good list of things. Some people may not even have a clue what a plotter is. You can't, most people don't, unless you're, I don't know, most individuals obviously do not have a plotter. You've probably printed off, things your whole life, but a plotter is a whole different animal. A common thing as well, and hopefully this doesn't happen for y'all in 2 weeks, you might work on your poster on one computer, and it looks great, but then you have to take it to somebody else's computer to do the printing, and you have some type of issue with that transfer. You either have images that don't show up, or maybe the text isn't found, the font type isn't found, and obviously that can be a headache. Then I've also run into, I use a lot of delta symbols for the work that I do. I've seen delta symbols look great on the screen, but on the output, they turn into a D. And then it's the final print, and what are you going to do? I've also run into things where this is especially true with grayscale images. So we do a lot of, in geology, a lot of scanning electron microscope work, and we end up with a grayscale image. I've literally had posters print. Well, I got a picture of one. You notice here, this should be A, B, C, and D, and only one image decided to print, and the others decided not to print. And you're like, what in the world? It looks great on the screen. How can the plotter not handle that? And it turned out to be, I'll mention this later, but I had to go back to the images for this individual, change them simply from a RGB color mode to a CMYK color mode, and everything printed just perfectly. But again, you don't want to, a lot of times you discover that when you get to point 4. I waited to the last day to print, and usually there's nothing good that ever comes out of that, past that sentence, right? Yep. Yes. And I've told students I worked with in the past that they've got to print a week early, or they're on their own after that. And I've got a buddy, he's still a friend. We're on Facebook, so we're together, so we're officially Facebook friends. He's in Texas A&M Corpus Christi now. We were going to Seattle for a geology conference, and he called me at 4 a.m. the night before his flight, needing help printing his poster. And I get there, and he wanted to add a new background to it as soon as I got there. I said, no, we're just going to hit print and go home. So definitely want to try to avoid number 4. All right, and I've already kind of mentioned this, but I've got a little bit of a challenge today in that I'm trying to condense what I teach my class in a whole semester into a Friday afternoon. We're not going to get through everything. I'll try to highlight mostly some improvements or some tips for working on posters. A lot of this, though, can apply to a PowerPoint presentation or a figure or a paper, proposal, or whatever. And then again, we're trying to make everybody a little bit more efficient at the preparation. Yes? Yeah. Okay. Yep. Yep. Do you know what file type, like the export is offhand? Yeah. So a similar story. What I would tend to do a lot of times is graph up my data in Excel, and then the Excel plot looked terrible, so I'd bring it over to Illustrator to dress it up. And PowerPoint, sorry, the Excel export over into Illustrator is absolutely terrible. You would end up with these boxes, like some artwork that shouldn't even be there, that I had to go through and delete all this like ghost information just to try to get it to where I could work with it. And with that, I ended up using a program that I highly recommend. It's called Golden Grapher. And I mention all this because Golden Grapher is unfortunately, it's a PC-only program, but I can literally just copy the graph in the graphing program and go over to Illustrator and just do a paste. And I can go through, it keeps it as line art, in that if I wanted to change the color of a certain line, I can still edit that just as I could in the original program. So there's huge differences from program to program in terms of how well things transfer over. What I would look into is some type of an export that's vector-based, so something like a PDF, a EPS, which is like a PostScript file. And I'm not as familiar with that software program, but oh, really? Okay. No, that's the thing. Yeah, there's the trial version. Really? Okay. Yep, yep, yep. I think, like if you talk about like graphing things, there's probably 2 or 3 main programs that, well, if you talk about a poster, like something used for a poster, it's probably Illustrator, PowerPoint, and maybe one other program that's pretty popular. If you talk about graphing, like crunching numbers and graphing numbers like Excel, if you ask 10 faculty members, you probably get 12 different answers on what programs they use. And I do use Excel all the time, but that's just kind of crunch the numbers and get them ready for dumping into Golden Grapher. And you might feel free to shoot me an email later on. I can look into that a little bit. I'm not as familiar with that program, but I'm pretty familiar with trying to get stuff to behave better in Illustrator. So with a poster in general, you might have these major sections. Obviously, this is going to vary. You might have more of a methods-based poster if you're early on in your graduate career, or even if you're a faculty and you're working on developing a new method. Or you might have a focus more on interpretations or what have you if you're getting towards the end of a project. If I were making my very first poster ever, I might go with some type of a format like this, where you've got your title, contact info on the top, and then just some bare bones basic structure to the poster. You might want to use some numbers to help identify, the flow of the poster. So you're going up and down, then move over, up and down, and then moving over once again. And then maybe just some lines in here to help kind of separate the different sections. And you can look into different ideas in terms of maybe making the title for a certain section one font size and the text a different font size to create some separation. That's some stuff you can play around with. But if you ever go to a poster, if you've never been to a conference and you're going for the first time, you're probably going in a couple of weeks, you're probably going to see a huge range in posters. I've been to conferences where people have literally taken their PowerPoint presentation, printed out 25 sheets of 8.5 by 11 paper, and just stapled it all up to the board. Yes, I tried to take a picture, but they probably would have gotten mad. Yes. And you'll see other people that have like this beautiful, this perfect photo paper, and they've cut out like a little hole, and they have an iPad in the background running a 3D simulation or something like that. But you can see a huge range in styles of posters and qualities of posters at these conferences. And so here's a poster design that probably would not go over as well. Like maybe where you've got a section or a couple sections running the full length of the poster. What can be very deceiving with the posters is that you spend all this time preparing them on a computer where you sit here, you can scroll around, but then when you print it out, it's a lot of times a lot bigger than what you think. And think about this, if you had your introduction and there's a bunch of reading, the person that stops by your poster is going to have to sit here and might have to literally move 8 feet to read the poster and then do a return and come back the other way. And then obviously, you don't want to try to do some type of thing where you come down, then back this way, then finish over here on the left. I'm all about being creative, and creative is good, but just make sure that the person that walks up to your poster for the first time ever can follow it. It might make perfect sense to you, but it doesn't mean it's going to make perfect sense to somebody else. This is one of the first posters I ever made. So I do a lot of work in caves. This is from DeSoto Caverns over on the other side of Birmingham, and not a very good poster. I was very early in on this project, didn't have a whole lot to talk about, and had a lot of wasted space that I could have used. Text is way too small, and the big thing back then, it's still pretty popular today, is trying to have a background image. There's Denny chimes, and trying to have it faded off in the background. But it can definitely make the reading of that pretty difficult. Another poster, and this is the last poster I did as a grad student. My struggle here was I'd been working on this project for 7 years, and I had a thesis that was 250 pages, and I had a hard time trying to condense just the main story from that into a fairly small poster. So I think the diagrams ended up looking a little bit better. It'd look better if the lights were off, but we're fine with that. But it's maybe a little bit too text heavy for this particular poster. This is one that ended up being pretty happy with. I actually went to a conference also in New Orleans, maybe in 2009 don't know if it has a date, 2013, I think is when it was. We were given 2 8-feet spaces to work with. And so what we ended up doing is we made one poster that was the hardcore science and paleoclimate and isotopes and all that. But we knew the audience that we were going to were not going to be experts in this field. So we made this poster where each little section can stand alone, and it talks about just individual little aspects of that research. How do you date a stalagmite? How do you sample a stalagmite? How do you measure the isotopic chemistry of the stalagmite? And you can start anywhere. It doesn't matter. There's no flow to this per se. But I was pretty happy that we could make a paleoclimate 101 style poster for that particular conference, because I knew that the audience would not be up to speed right off the bat with the type of work that we do. All right, so I've got some tips. And again, a lot of this is going to be available. I mean, you'll have this on Box here in a little bit. I've kind of broken into some different sections. For me, probably one of the hardest things is starting the poster, or especially a paper. I'd rather do a poster than a paper all day long. But you know, start soon. Start as soon as you can. It's going to make life a whole lot easier. And obviously, we've already talked about the length. It will be. Yes. Sure. The third thing, I kind of joke around with this a lot about if I spend like an hour a day on your poster. There are some days where I come to the office and everything's clicking and I'm interpreting data and I'm graphing things up and things are going great. I've got other days where I can't remember what I had for breakfast, my brain hurts, and I want to at least be productive. Maybe spend that day just redigitizing something, just mindless work, but hey, that's another hour that you've put into it, and you're that much closer to being done. And obviously, you know, look into the poster guidelines for wherever you're going. Know how big the poster can be. And probably the bigger point, I need to add this. Make sure you know how wide of a poster you can print. Are y'all up to, is it 42 inches over here? Do y'all know? Yeah, so like the conference might say, well, you can do a 48-inch wide poster, and if you draft your poster at 48 inches, it's not going to do you much good when you go to the plotter and your paper's only 42 inches. You either have to shrink it down, which causes other problems, or you have to reorganize the whole thing, and you're probably printing it the very last day. So be aware of that. We talked about, I guess, resolution issues earlier. We can talk more about that later if we want to. Again, it might look pretty good on the screen, but then you go to print it, and it's going to look pixelated and not be that great. Spell check. Illustrator does have spell check. I will give PowerPoint the edge on this, I guess. PowerPoint does do spell check as you go. Illustrator, you have to manually say, run spell check. And the other thing is, Illustrator is built with layers that you can lock. If all your text is in a layer that's locked and you say do spell check, it's not going to look at those layers. So you might say, well, I spell checked it and I've got my name spelt wrong on the final poster. And I've seen that happen before too. Be sure you spell check. And then another thing too is Illustrator, unless the newer version does something I'm unfamiliar with, it does not do like an auto backup. I think I fell victim to this. I worked several hours on a poster, didn't save the work, it crashed, and I had to start back over. So make sure you save your work. And then for the last one, you just get on YouTube. Ask somebody how to do this or that. You get on YouTube, it may be showing you the steps to do what you're trying to do. It may not be geology or geography related, but a lot of information on YouTube. Or just ask some friends. I think probably the top thing on here is one of the more important things I can share. Um, I've judged posters before. I've helped with posters before. I don't think I've ever had a case, maybe one case in 20 years, where there was too little text on the poster. Usually it's too much text. So my rule of thumb is just enough text that if you left your poster, somebody came up to it, they can make it through the poster with you not being there. Again, save the text for a paper. Another thing too, and this is also pretty true for PowerPoint presentations, don't try to tell them your whole thesis. Try to get a few points across, maybe one or two, maybe three at the most, main points you're trying to convey to them. You'll do a whole lot better with a few points than just one, or than many points. If you go to two different conferences with the same content, the final poster might be different depending on what type of audience you have to work with. Years ago, I went to a conference in Romania. It was specifically geologists. It was specifically people that worked on paleoclimate, and it was specifically people that worked in cave systems for paleoclimate records. So it was the 200 people in almost pretty much every paper I'd ever read, the author was there. And I could probably get away with jargon there more so than I could at maybe a big conference with 20,000 people, and you've got everything from dust on Mars to paleoclimate from stalagmites in Alabama. So try to avoid jargon. And that's where actually the last thing kind of comes into play too. Let somebody else look at your poster. Let somebody that's not in geology or geography or science in general look at your poster and see where they get hung up. And then just make those changes as you need to. And then, especially that conference I went to where everybody was there was somebody that I had worked or had cited at one point or another. If you're comparing your data to somebody else's data, make sure you cite it properly, because there's a good chance that person might end up at your poster. Then printing tips, if you can print on campus, that's great. We've got plotters here. Geology's got one. That's what Printing Services has one. Many plotters. And then if you can do a draft, and this is something I run into where it's a cost thing. Is it better to print off a draft and use some paper there, or take your chances and try to print on photo paper from the get-go? But if that gets messed up, then you're doing a whole nother copy on photo paper again. But I'm a big proponent of doing a draft. You can even scale it down to half the size, and you don't have to use as much paper. And I find it easier to look for spelling mistakes on a hard copy. Your color scheme, you can check that. And then you can also look for text that changed. So I had a friend that had some strange text for his abstract. Looked great on the printer, on the computer. He printed it. For some reason, the font got replaced with like Times New Roman, and it was just running off the space, and text was cut off, and everything like that. So highly recommend a draft. Got another funny story about checking the ink levels. Maybe y'all have run into this. I had a friend that waited till 6 o'clock on a Friday to print. He got halfway through his poster and said, "I need magenta ink." And then a timer started counting. And it got down to 0, and it just cut his poster in half. That was pretty funny, even though it wasn't mine. So make sure you've got plenty of ink. Yep. I don't know. I can say this. Years ago, over in geology, it was like $2 a foot photo paper, sorry, for regular paper. Then I think it was $4 for photo paper. We ran into something years, I mean, I can't remember the exact cause of it, but I think now the department pretty much is just paying for the posters within geology. Okay. Okay. um, hmm, okay. Yep, 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 yep. I don't know about the library. I don't recall ever printing in a library, but we do have like university printing as a whole. Um, well, I'll say this. Yeah, and even that is like never. I would never recommend printing off campus at all. Um, oh, if you go to like our big conference is AGU in San Francisco, and it's like this is like 10 years ago. It's like $175. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, it's also for people that leave their poster by the door. Yep, 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 yep. Speaking of which, I literally have a buddy, one of my buddies, one of my students, he left his poster, luckily on the way back from San Francisco. He left it on the streets of San Francisco. But he did have his contact information, and they mailed it back, and I guess you sent him a check for the shipping. I don't know. But in all seriousness, it is a good idea to take your poster file and put it on the cloud, put it on jump drive or something, because you definitely don't want to go halfway across the country, spend all that work, all that time on your poster, and then the airlines loses it, you forget it, it gets damaged. I don't know why anybody would steal your poster, but something's going to happen. So definitely have a backup. And then obviously if you go on a plane, make sure you take it with you and not check it. I always tell my students for AGU, we start off in Birmingham, and I'm the one person there with a poster tube. And the first question is where are you going fishing? I'm like, well, I'd love to be going fishing, but I'm going to a conference. You get maybe to Houston, and you might see 2 or 3 poster tubes. Then you get to San Francisco, and every other person has a poster tube. So I'm sure New Orleans will be like that as well in a couple of weeks. Just some quick things about setting up your figure, even if it's the same data, depending on what format you're presenting it in. So if you have a manuscript, you're not going to have much wiggle room in terms of font choices and sizes and things like that. Typically, you have a huge packet of, every little detail that you need to follow for your posters. 12-point font and Times New Roman or maybe Times or something simple. So your figure in a manuscript might look like this. And probably the biggest thing I run into, and it's because it is easy and it is a lazy way of doing it, is when you go to a PowerPoint, you just copy and paste that figure into the PowerPoint. It takes 5 seconds. And sometimes that might go well. A lot of times it doesn't go well, because if you're giving a PowerPoint, that 12-point Times New Roman isn't big enough. And a lot of times you're not putting one figure on a slide. You put 4, 5, 6 figures on a slide, and everything gets smaller and smaller and smaller. So I'm a big proponent of trying, if you have time, drafting figures specifically for that particular medium that you're gonna work with. And this is where I do like programs like Grapher, because I can make it set up for the manuscript very easily, and then switched it over to a PowerPoint slide pretty easily as well. And in this case, I actually changed the background as well from being a white background to a black background. And then if you do a poster, this is actually a student that put some of this data or added to this data for a poster. And then you can get a little bit more creative with colors. Obviously, you need to look at your font sizes in that case as well, and see what would be appropriate. And main thing, though, try to customize your data for whatever source you're going to be presenting it from. So the next few slides, these are some things I've prepped, and I'm going to put on to UA Box, and I think it should be useful. This is hot off the press. I finished this yesterday. It's not comprehensive, but I've been helping with this for 20 years now. I see the same problems over and over and over again. So I'm trying to put together something where we can be a little bit more proactive and try to troubleshoot or fix some of these issues before they happen, because they're going to happen the day before your flight. This one is, or I'll just kind of mention a couple of these real quick. For those of you that have worked with Illustrator, have you run into linked images issues? Does that ring a bell at all? The way that Illustrator works, or can work, is it reduces its file size by linking, like if you throw in a figure or an image, it doesn't, by default, a lot of times it does not embed that data into that file. It just builds a link to that file. Keeps the file size down, but if you go to a different computer, especially to print, it's going to try to find that image that was linked, and you have to go back to that original computer, fix the link, and all that sort of stuff. So anyway, this is all kind of typed up to help deal with problems like that. And this is something where I'm a little bit more in the dark about. My students from last semester actually ran across this. I've given a PDF that's also on the box, and then this website you can click on, where it kind of has UA's policies for logos. And it's very, very, very precise in terms of, if this is your logo, this text can only be half the size of that logo, and a bunch of things like that. But it has all the high resolution. You can get a JPEG or an EPS. This is a vector-based format. These two are raster formats. But thought that might be a handy thing to have. And then this is another thing that I don't work with as much, but at least we use a lot of patterns. I specifically don't work with this a whole lot, but I've also got a folder with hundreds and hundreds of different patterns that you can be able to drag into Illustrator and work with. So that might be helpful. And then this is pretty much my last slide for this. I thought about kind of leaving it up to y'all. We can either kind of talk through some specific issues, or I've got this little crash course thing where, again, another file on box, but it basically just here are the tools in Illustrator that I use the most, and here are some tips getting through all that. So I'll kind of leave it up to y'all in terms of if you want to plow through that, or if you want me to kind of hit some specific, like, hey, I don't know how to do this. Can you show me how to do such and such? So kind of leave it up to y'all for that. Think so? Okay. Well, so if you open up Illustrator, if you can on your station. Yeah. think we lost Illustrator up here. Okay. Hmm? It did, but I think when it rebooted overnight, it went away or something like that. Yeah. Oh. So what do we want to try? Oh. I was having to get in my down. Yeah. I already did that.
Yeah, but I think that's
Okay. Oh, this is. Ah. Where did it thing? I'll just put Illustrator, not the whole package on there. I guess for now, if it'll let me.
yeah.
Should.
I think it ought.
I don't. I've done this once before, but I can't remember.
I'll probably put it
Yeah.
It's just like
Okay. And I brought my laptop, but then it's USB-C. I'm trying to get everything like adapted over to
yeah,
HDMI and. Yeah. Does he need my password? Because I guess I'm still in Alabama.
It's like I used to class.
I promise I am who I say I am. I didn't even think about checking that beforehand.
Yeah, I didn't. Okay, so you can just do it.
I guess 17 is the latest. Pretty fast. How long have you been using Creative Cloud? Not Creative Cloud. InDesign.
Um,
Really? Okay. Okay. I had my master's student did her thesis in that, and I asked her if she had to do it over again, would she do it? And she said she would.
yeah.
I like that. Like you can go in, import like an Illustrator figure. If you need to change something, you can just like open it straight back up in Illustrator, and it'll.
Yeah, it's kind of like.
Yeah, yeah. It does.
I didn't have this. I searched it.
Oh, they're not in there yet.
Oh no, I know.
Oh,
You installed it?
are you talking about?
Okay,
You
that's
talking about the
great.
computer?
Okay.
Yeah, like these should have it.
Yeah, okay. You
But
installed it.
this one didn't. Yeah. Whoa. So. All right, I think I'm good to go. Good to go. Is everybody set up with Illustrator so far? All right. How many of y'all, if anybody is, and I expect maybe half the class hasn't, or half the group, how many of you have never worked with Illustrator at all? Perfect. Okay. So we're going to start from as if you've never opened Illustrator until today. So that's going to be perfect. If you're more advanced, some of this might be old hat to you. There are hopefully some things that I've kind of added in here that might be, oh, I didn't know you could. I knew how to do that, but it took me longer to get to that point. So hopefully this is where the whole efficiency thing will come in. If you get bored or tired of listening to me, just take off. I won't be offended. Yeah. I'm good until 4:30. I have to pick up my son. So, I'll say this about Illustrator. Illustrator probably has like 20 different versions that have been around for years. Illustrator, unfortunately, does not always play as well from one version to another version, especially if you're trying to go like open something new on an older version. But they have kept the workflow pretty consistent. The toolbar today doesn't look a whole lot different than the toolbar did 10 years ago. But if you're here, let's say you want to create a new file, let me kind of walk you through some of this basic setup. And this is a new This is a new format they're doing this with, but I'm going to go to print, and you have all these little presets that you could work with. But what I'm going to switch over personally over to inches, and this is essentially just an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper. You can either do it landscape or portrait. It doesn't matter at all for today. I never work with more than one artboard, and don't worry about any of this bleed stuff over here in this little section here. My understanding, bleed is like if you were doing a book where if you wanted to print all the way up to the edge, the way a real book is made is it prints on larger paper. You print towards the edge and then they trim off the edges. Here, we're not going to worry about that at all. Yes. So I think when I opened this up at first, it defaulted to recent. So I would just scroll over here to print. And this is under create new file. One thing to note with all this, and all this is topped up in here, you'll have all this. You can change every bit of this later on. So you can just kind of start with something and modify it as you need to. So here's my 8.5 by 11 size sheet of paper. Let's see what I start off with. And of course, here's your toolbar. One just minor thing, this little double arrows here will let you make the toolbar either one single row of icons, or you can make it a little bit shorter and double up the icons. And I've got a little thing in your notebook or that you'll find where it's like a little summary of what all the different tools are. And again, there might be 30 tools on here. There are 20, maybe 10 of these tools that I use over and over and over again, and the rest you can just ignore. This is going to end up on the box. Yep. All right, so let's just kind of dive in, and I encourage you to follow along. Let's start with this rectangle tool. This is over here, about 5 icons down. And Illustrator is very finicky on how you click. Clicking means a lot. You can make it do a number of different things depending on if you click and hold or just click, and we'll talk through all of that. But I can just click on a spot and then drag my mouse around, and it's going to give me, by default, it's going to give me a, just a rectangle of some shape. And it's giving me a little preview of, this is 5.39 inches by 2.54 inches. You may want to make, instead of a rectangle, make a perfect square. If you hold down Shift, it's going to make a perfect square. No matter where your mouse is, as you expand it or shrink it, it's going to stay a perfect square. So Shift, when you do this for all these tools, is going to keep the proportions the same, and that can be handy in a lot of different cases. Another option is if you hold down, let's see, yeah, if you hold down Alt and click, it's going to make that polygon centered on your first click. So here's the difference. So here's this clicking. It starts in the left corner and moves down, versus if you hold down Alt, you can center something. Like I can center it right here, but I can center it right here, and it's going to expand off that center point. So that's where Alt comes into play. And then if you hold down, if you hold down Shift and Alt, it's going to make a perfect square centered on that point. Okay. So first thing you need to do is make sure it's selected. So in Illustrator, if you select it, it's going to give this little bounding box. Yep, yeah, sorry. There's this little select tool. We'll talk more about that here in a minute. But you can click on it and then just physically hit the delete, or you can right click and it should be, maybe not. Maybe just hit delete on the keyboard. It's also worth noting for the rectangle tool, if you click and hold down for that rectangle tool, you'll find these other tools that are available up under it. So you've got a rectangle with rounded corners, you've got an ellipse tool, polygon, star. I've never found a good use for flare tool. It looks pretty cool, but geology doesn't work with flares too well, apparently. If you go to the ellipse tool, let me show you that one. Again, this is where you can kind of freehand an ellipse if you want to, or you might prefer to, again, hold down shift and it's going to make you a perfect circle. Okay. So again, holding down shift gives you a perfect square, a perfect circle, and so forth. Sorry? So make sure you're clicking on that rectangle and like click and hold, and all these should pop up. Another option is the star tool. I can't remember if I've mentioned that in here or not, but I'll mention it anyway. So there's, you know, a 5-sided star. Pretty simple. You can also, so let me back up. For years, I had the hardest time making a triangle in Illustrator. I'd have to make a line and then make another line and rotate it and try to join it all together. Painful, didn't look good. And then I figured this out. If you go to the star tool and just click, it's going to give you some options. And I think I found this by accident. I clicked when I didn't mean to. I'm like, what in the world is this screen? I can change the characteristics of that star. And if I go down to 3 points, it makes a triangle. You can rotate. Yep. Yep. So make sure you have your star tool selected, and then just click once. Just like click and let go, and it pops up. And you can add, 7 sides to it. You can change, like if you change these settings, like the radius, that's like how far out the points go, and then how far out the valleys go. You can really manipulate the size of that, very precisely. Yes. We'll talk about that here in just a little bit. That's actually the next topic. Let's do that. Let's make it a pretty star. Okay, 2 things within Illustrator. And we're going to concentrate on these little icons here on the lower part of the toolbar. And if you hover over those, first off, click on your star. Make sure it's highlighted. That's this little box that's around it. And then let's come over here to these icons. And if you hover over it, it's going to say the big box that's solid is the fill color. That's the color on the inside of the box. Yep. Fine by me. Are we good? Yeah, yeah, dark is good with me. if it's good with y'all. So this box here is the fill color, and that's basically the inside contents of that polygon. This other line, if you hover over it, is going to be the stroke, and that's the color of the line that is going around your polygon, in this case, a star. By default in Illustrator, you're going to have a black stroke and a white fill. Let's make it pretty though, all right? So let's go to the fill, and if you just double click on it, you're going to get a little color picker, which you've probably seen something like this in various programs. But you can scroll through here and pick a color of your choice. If you get really advanced with this, you can come in here and dial in the CMYK. This is, let me back up a little bit. RGB is going to have to do with, that's the color mode that your phone works with, computer screens work with, and so forth. Just red, blue, and green, combining those colors to give you, millions of other colors. CMYK is the color scheme that a plotter or a printer works with. This is ink that's added. That could be a whole hour discussion in itself. But you can get in here, like if you wanted to print something off in Alabama, like the crimson red or the crimson color, I think you can get on UA's website and find the CMYK colors that you would need to get that color precisely accurate. If you're not, real confident about clicking through here and finding your color or dialing it in, you can also just go to color swatches, and it just says, give me a green, give me a cyan, give me a blue. You have a bunch of preset colors that you can work with. And I've started using this a lot more than I did in the past, the preset. So let's go with CMYK red. And now we've got a red fill for our star. I can click here and let's change that stroke. And we'll change it to let's do cyan. Oops. So, yep, I messed that up. I did not have it selected first. Make sure you have it selected, then go to color swatches, then cyan. We'll talk more about this in a minute. I'm gonna make that stroke a little bit wider to start with. All right, here's another neat little tool. Let's say that I made that star and I was making some graphic or whatever, and I had my colors flip-flop by accident. My fill color should have been the stroke and vice versa. These little arrows here let you toggle back and forth your color scheme with one click. Just click there and it rotates around. So you can just go back and forth with that. Another option is, so that's the stroke. You should have a little tool panel. Well, let me back up. I don't know the right term for this. I call it like the interactive tool panel, but this top little tool panel here will change based on what you're working with. If you select, yeah, well, you can get it on the right too, yeah. Yeah, there's also, you can get to it over here as well. So here's, yeah, so you can get to it over here. You've got it up here on the top as well. And yeah, the stroke is essentially just the weight of the line. How thick do you want it to be? Let's see what else. Oh, one thing to note over here notice how, in this case, I've got the stroke box on top of the fill box. Whichever one is on top is the one that's active, meaning that it's the one that if you were to change something, or if you were to I think the best way of explaining this. So now here I've got the the fill on top, and if I were to click on this none button, for whichever one I have selected, it's going to basically totally get rid of any color at all. So if I hit none, then my fill goes essentially transparent, completely transparent. It's going to be your most popular button, and I even do the keyboard shortcut Control Z, or if it's an Apple, it's whatever Z for that. But so if I were to click on the stroke instead and clicked on none, it would make my stroke go away. And let's say that, you want to kind of start back over from scratch. Down here in this lower left-hand corner, you've got just the default settings. You can click on that, and it just goes back to white and black and white with the 1-point stroke all the way around. Let's see if there's anything else on that I wanted to mention. Yeah, we can do some text. So the main thing with text is there's two different ways of building a text box, and it kind of depends which way you go, depends on what you want to do. If I just click, and it's already auto-populated that for me. Let me zoom in real quick. If I just click and started typing in text, let's do Roll Tide. How about that? That's going to behave completely different than another way of doing Roll Tide. In this case, I'm going to click and drag and make a box. Let's put Roll Tide in here a bunch, like a paragraph. I typically stay away from just clicking and typing. Copy and paste. Copy and paste. Yep. In this case, if I change this box, my text is going to get distorted as I change that box. It's going to, in this case, shrink and in one direction, stretch out the other, and be completely distorted. Most times you don't want that to happen. Maybe there's an exception here and there. But it's just going to kind of treat that as an object. See, told you, Control Z. And it's just going to basically tie it to the shape of that bounding box. What you probably want to use the most is, again, where you just click and drag and make this little box first. That's going to behave a whole lot in a much more friendlier manner, in that if I change this box size, it's going to treat it like a paragraph where it wraps the text around, and the font size is not distorted at all. And probably one of the most common things I see on a poster is somebody was running out of room, they tried to shrink stuff down to make it fit, and then the text became crunched in the process. And then, of course, with this, you can go in here and you can change, your font type. You can do whatever you want with that. You can adjust, the font size as you need to as well. Another not trivial thing, but minor thing to note. Can y'all see this little this little red box that's appeared on the lower right-hand side. If you see that, that means that you've got some text that basically you have more text than what your box has room for. It says you need to make your box bigger so you can see all of your text. So if I make that box bigger, yeah, sure enough, there's more text there, and then that red mark goes away. I've literally seen where people printed off their poster and the last sentence got chopped off because they didn't realize. They just copied and pasted from Word and they lost a sentence or two because it didn't show up. It was giving a warning that, hey, you got something you need to adjust, and they didn't catch it. Yep. And I think this is pretty new to Illustrator. For years, I had to like manually do subscripts and superscripts and all that. And they finally have caught up, I guess, and it's all built in now. You can superscript and subscript within the font settings by default. Literally, my entire thesis, every superscript and subscript in the figure was done manually. So you want to highlight whatever text you have, and then go up to character on that top. This should be on this little top panel. Maybe on your, well, no, it's up there. Look up there on the top, right, top center. Well, you get it on both though. See, I've got it right here too. Where'd it go? Oh, duh, I'm looking at my screen over there on that computer. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. There's also, this is kind of a random thing. We're talking about characters and stuff. In Illustrator, there's this glyph panel where it has a bunch of your delta symbols and all your different symbols and stuff built into it as well. So that is under, go to type and down to glyph. And let me say this too about Illustrator versus PowerPoint. Like PowerPoint, you can get the job done in a lot of cases, but it's kind of a slimmed down version of what Illustrator can do. Illustrator is like the Mercedes, and the PowerPoint is more like the Camry. Camry will get you there. But a lot of people, and rightly so, can be very intimidated with Illustrator because there's so many things that you can adjust. I've been doing this for almost 20 years, and I bet I've hit 10% of the capabilities of Illustrator, just enough to get myself in trouble. Yep. It's just what I started with. I don't think when I started years ago that InDesign was even around. I want to say that's a little bit newer program, at least to me it is. I've started using InDesign more frequently in the last couple of years, though. And a lot of the tools and the mindset, the layout is very, very similar. InDesign, and correct me if I'm wrong, is maybe a little bit more geared towards like making a book or posters and things like, not posters, books or magazines, and where you have like multiple pages. I typically think of photos or of Illustrator being, here's just my one artboard I'm going to work with. I know you can do more than one. And maybe, do you have knowledge of how big of a artboard you can work on in Illustrator, in InDesign? Okay. Yep. 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 I guess I'll tell you this. What I do like about InDesign is if I had an image that was in color and I needed to make it that one image black and white for some reason. In Illustrator, and this still should be true, best I know, I would have to go back, find that original image, change it to black and white, and then like re-import a completely new file. In InDesign, you simply just like right click and say, open this file in Photoshop, and you can do anything you want. You have the full capabilities of Photoshop.
Yeah.
Yep. And then you just save it, close it, save it, and your InDesign automatically updates. And best I know, Illustrator does not have that between program integration like InDesign was. My one, and I'm totally for InDesign, my only hang up might be is, can it let you do a 4-foot by 8-foot post? So, and one thing about PowerPoint is, last I checked, you could only do about 4 feet width in poster. So you might run into people at a conference that have like 52, they have like 2 posters that are taped together just because they couldn't reach the full length, which, you know, if that's the worst thing you have to deal with in life, you're doing pretty good. Let's see, anything else with text? Yep. 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 Oh, and let me mention this too. This is going to be found in that little poster printing guide. One of the last steps I recommend is, have your poster done, have it saved, but the very last bit, I make a copy of it maybe so you don't overwrite your original, but I have found it's very helpful to basically like select all of your text and convert it from text to simply just line art, where it basically it loses this text information, which makes it terrible for ever trying to edit it again, so don't save your changes. But it totally gets away with any problems of going to a different computer and that computer not having that font. It doesn't lose that font because there's no font to lose. It's just line art. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And everything that I'm saying, there might be 10 different ways of getting, to your final destination. I've just kind of come up with, hey, this worked. Not particularly. No. I think there is some science behind certain types of fonts are better in the printed form, and some types of fonts do better on like a PowerPoint or something like that. Okay. Okay. I never use those. Yeah. I mean, yeah. I mean, you can theoretically do some stuff with this, but I guess I never do it. I do it in Grapher and then just copy and paste it into Illustrator. yeah, it can be done. Yep. Okay. To be honest, what I've started doing lately is, and this has worked for 90% of everything I've needed to do. I've just done I don't know what the shortcut is on a PC, but on a Mac, it's like 4 buttons, but it's like Command, Alt, Shift, and 4. But I basically can do like a screenshot of just that area, and then I just paste it right in. Yeah. I usually have my background image in Illustrator the same as what my PowerPoint's going to be. That's just my workaround for that. Just saving it. I will show you this. Here's one good thing. One thing that I learned that helps a lot with things like that. This is a little bit more steps involved, but there should be a. Now it's a legacy thing, but it's a save for web. So JPEGs are great in that you reduce your file size a lot, but it has algorithms built into it where when it redraws your image, it loses information in that redrawing, but for human vision, we can't see that change a lot of times. This, best I know, that Save for Web is even like a more advanced version of that. This is like something where if you wanted to make something for a PowerPoint, it even does like more, I guess, file size reduction, but it still maintains enough quality for a PowerPoint. You wouldn't want to do Save for Web for printing, but you can get some crazy small file sizes with still some decent images with this. But this is, a little bit more steps involved, and that you have to export it, save it somewhere, then go and import it within PowerPoint. But Save for Web is something that I've used a lot. And there might be some options out there. I mean, this little checkered pattern means that background should be transparent. I don't have a whole lot of experience with that, but that might be a good YouTube or Google search for, like, can I truly save this and bring it into PowerPoint to where, yes, my white background is going to disappear and be transparent when I actually do bring it into PowerPoint. That might be another option. Yeah. Can we turn off this mic? I can say this, if it is, you can get a lot of those logos as either a JPEG or which is a raster file. Those would be hard to manipulate, but the EPS versions and EPS and, yeah, the EPS version might be a little bit easier to tweak. But you didn't hear me say that. I don't know. It's in your Dropbox thing. Let me show you this. So I've been kind of loosely mentioning these already, but notices the difference between an object that's not selected versus one that is. You get these little, this little box that shows up, and you have these little nodes that show up. You've got one at each corner and one here on the sides. Those are pretty important. If you mouse over the ones in the corner, you get that little double arrow showing up there that lets you rotate that in. Something I found helpful is you can switch between like a freehand rotation. Here it's previewing that angle. But if you hold down Shift, you think nothing's happening, but then it rotates at exactly 45-degree angles all the way around, which maybe a square is not the best thing to show that with. Let me think of another one. We make a, yes, although Illustrator has made it more difficult, depending on the version, it's made it more difficult for that to happen. I'll show you what I mean here in a second. Let me do a triangle. Let's do, yep. So here I can, again, freehand or hold down Shift, and it's gonna go at perfect 45-degree angle increments all the way around. So if you wanted to have a line that's at exactly 45 degrees, you can do that pretty easily with this. Let's go back to a rectangle maybe. You can also grab those points and extend the size from that point. Again, if you hold down Shift, it'll keep that size increased proportional. If you wanted just to grab one corner or one side and extend it, you would grab one of those nodes on the side and go up or down or whatever you want to do. This little circle in the middle is something new to me. Let's see what it does. Yeah, okay, that adds like a rounded option to it. You can kind of shave off corners if you wanted to. Or Control Z. You're asking about text. Let's look at that real quick. Let's let it auto-populate some of that text. This, by default, does a function that I typically would not want it to do. Like it actually has kept my font horizontal while the whole object rotated. There is, I can't remember, there is a, maybe it's, I think I just double clicked whatever that little thing hanging down was. Now it ought to, nope. Double click, okay, here it is. So you double click on this, and now it should rotate the text and the object together. Okay, that's that little handle thing that kind of pops off the side of your text box. So, probably 1,000 times I have typed my text like this, and then I needed to turn it, had a figure where I needed to turn it to make it an axis label, and I just turn it that way, and you're good to go. I don't like to type stuff that's going up or down. All right, let me show you all the difference between the select tool and the direct select tool. So I typically am using this selection tool that's in the upper left, but you also have this direct select tool that's similar on the upper right. This lets you be a little bit more specific in what you're selecting, in that, let's see, let's go back to default first, but I can Let me show you what I mean. In this case, I can grab just one corner of that polygon and manipulate just that one corner. So if you want to do like some exploding box type thing, you could, or make a kite, I guess, an upside down, a kite that's falling out of the sky, you can do that. But again, and let me see if I can get it big enough where you can see it. See how that node or that anchor point is really small, but you see how it's open in the middle, like it's just a white little circle? If I click on it, though, it's going to have some color to it, meaning that it's selected. In other words, that one is selected, but if I look at the other one, it still has a white color to it. That's kind of a key of identifying or making sure that you've got the right corner or the right node selected, and you can manipulate it. You could also grab that one corner and just hit the delete button, and it's going to get rid of part of your polygon. And again, why do you need to do this? It's going to vary for every one of you, but there might be some case where you need to make this shape or that shape, and I'm just trying to give you the tools to get to that point. You can also grab maybe both of those corners at once and move them together if you need to. Oh, let me show you this magic wand tool. I think I remember how it works. Let's say that we've got all right, so here we've got some different polygons. Some are one color, some are a different color. I believe the magic wand if I click on the magic wand, it's going to, and I click on this red box, it's going to select every box that has the same attributes as the first one that I clicked on. So it's going to grab all the red boxes for me. And you might say, well, hey, why not just click on all four and you're done, no big deal. Well, what if you've got a map and you've got, a topo line on it, and you need to change the color of a topo line, and there's 2,000 or 100 topo lines you need to select. You don't want to sit there and have to click through 100 of those. This kind of gives you the power of clicking on one, and it's going to select everything with the same attributes for you automatically. Okay, and then I could obviously click on the other color, and it's going to grab those as well. And then you can either, you can move those if you need to, or delete them, or whatever you need to do. The lasso tool, this is getting to a little bit of stuff that I don't use a whole lot. For the lasso tool, you could basically draw a path, and it's going to select only the nodes within that circle. So it's just only grabbed a handful of those, and you could delete them or move them or whatever you need to do. All right, so one of my first assignments as a grad student years ago was redrafting a diagram, global temperatures the last 1,000 or 10,000 years. from my advisor, and I had no clue what I was doing. Had to use the Illustrator. I basically said, somebody said, here's an iMac, the old school iMacs, redraft this for us. And I'm pretty sure I clicked and redrafted the whole thing with one continuous line because I didn't know how to stop the line. And it was pretty rough. Probably the tool that I use the most, especially with redrafting, is this pen tool. Got a pen tool. You should have a pencil tool in here that we'll look at in a little bit. But let's start off with this pen tool. With the pen tool, this is probably similar to something that you might have. I guess you would have this in Photoshop, PowerPoint. But you can basically just click and maybe retrace a property boundary or trace over a stream or something like that. And just like always, you can go to that line that you drew. You can change the color. You can change the weight. This might be a good spot here to mention this as well. Streams might look sort of like this, but streams typically don't have these strong angles to them. You've got some options here where you can kind of round off some of the corners. You can have them rounded or beveled or perfectly square. Let's see, if you wanted to do, here's where that shift is going to be helpful again. Let's say that I want to draw a line straight across, okay? This is something where I struggled with, where I'm like, that looks kind of straight, and this is before we had, any type of guide that might help us. If you hold down Shift, it's going to stay perfectly horizontal, okay? So I'm trying to make it straight, hold down Shift, it's going to straighten it out for me. If I'm trying to go completely vertical, just get it close, hold down Shift, and it's going to make it perfectly vertical for you. If you want to do a right angle, a 45-degree angle, get close, hold it down, it's going to keep that perfect 45-degree angle for you. So you can make nice straight lines very quickly, and then very quickly run right back into something that's more freehand. One thing to note is, let me tell you what I wish I knew years ago. How do I, everywhere I'm trying to click, it's trying to draw me a new line. How do I get rid of that? A couple of options. One is just to hit Enter, and now it's kind of finished off that line. Or you should be able to just click off on a different tool, and it'll cut it off there as well. There might be the case where you want to connect all the way around. So, for example, if you had a fill color, it looks close to being right, and maybe I want to extend all the way around. What I'm looking for is, you see that little circle that's showing up on the lower right-hand side of that pen tool? That's telling you that you've got your cursor over the other node, that if you click there, it's just going to combine everything together for you. So you click there, and it's all now one continuous polygon. Oh, here's something pretty handy too. Yeah. Okay. Let me show you two options. If you're using the pen tool, let's say we click once. So this is where the clicks get really important in terms of what you're doing. I can click and hold down the click and then move it and it's going to let me do, it's going to let me do some type of angle. Okay, that's one way of doing it. Then I can click here, click again, and I can do something like that. Another option, this is the pencil tool, I think. Oh, that's not what I wanted. Where's the pencil tool? I'll click around, help me find the pencil tool. I moved it. I'm sorry? This guy right here? Okay. Yeah, so here's this pencil tool. And this is where you can do more freehand, where wherever you click and move around, just click once and move around and follow your curves. It's going to draw that for you. Yep. And what it's basically doing is following your path, and it's using some algorithm to know where to put nodes to draw that. And you can also make it, you can change how sensitive it is. In other words, if you've had some coffee and your hand's jittery like crazy, if you have it really sensitive, it's going to pick up every one of those slight movements. Or you can set it to just be more of a smooth all that out. Yep. Let's see where it's at. You double click on it, and yeah, this fidelity, you can go very smooth or very accurate. Okay, so just double click on the tool. Yes, sorry. Okay. So it was doing, well, so it was doing something like that? Okay. If you don't want it to be filling that in, you would just go to your fill and just say don't have any fill, go to none. And then it'll just be a single line going around. And just a little side trick, sometimes I'm redrafting something and I want it to eventually have a fill, but because I'm redrafting, or as I'm redrafting, my fill is like covering up what I'm trying to see. So sometimes I'll make the fill go away and then just bring it back at the end. So sometimes you just kind of have to use some troubleshooting to get through even though yes, this is what you want at the end, how do I get to that the easiest way? Let me also show you a pretty handy tool. It's called the eyedropper tool. Let's say that I've made I made a diagram for my master's work, and now I'm continuing that work for a PhD, and I'm going to take that figure but make it better and update it, but I do want to keep with the same color scheme, or you can use this 1,000 different ways. Basically, I need this polygon to have the same settings as this polygon. One option will be to come here and look and figure out all my different settings and then write that down and type it in over here. Or I can select the object I want to change, click on this eyedropper tool, and then click on the object I am trying to transfer that pattern or color scheme over from. So if I just click there, my new object takes on those those properties. If you do get into patterns at one point and this and that, it works for patterns, it works for colors, should work for even like your stroke settings. Basically, all your attributes get copied over. And to some degree, if you had a picture here, it should, best I know, you could pull out even like the color. I think it would do that. It might. I don't know. You might be able to even pull out some color information as well. You might have to go into Photoshop for that. I'm not totally, can't remember off the top of my head. But I use that a pretty good bit. I might make a bunch of other polygons, not worry about the colors until I'm done, and then just do one more copy. Just copy it all over with the eyedropper tool. Okay, here, let me show you this, what kind of change. Well, let me ask you this. Any other questions on the tools real quick? Yes, either. Oh, yes, I had that happen earlier. So this is what's happened, right? Yes. You go to view, then scroll down to perspective view, and I guess hide grid, and that should go away. I ran into that. Last time I taught the class was back in the fall. I ran into that and had no clue how to get rid of it. Eventually did. Okay, what else? That's going to be more of a Photoshop. Maybe more of a Photoshop type thing. Yeah. If it's a raster file image, that's going to be something you do in Photoshop, which most of what you pull off the web is going to be a raster image. If it's a line-based image or a vector-based image, no, JPEG's raster. It'd need to be like maybe some PDFs, an EPS file. It needs to be a vector-based, and then sometimes, a lot of times within Illustrator, that is when you could go in and modify. I don't know if I'd say any EPS file, but you've got a better chance. With the JPEG, you have 0 chance. With the EPS file, you've got a chance. It probably kind of depends on how that EPS file was put together. Yep. Yep. This right here. Okay. I don't know how to use that tool. Maybe just clicking more, it's just kind of, it keeps adding. Is it doing that? Is it adding one vertical and one horizontal every time I click, I guess? Let me double check that. So, yeah, so there's one vertical, one horizontal. Mesh point. Yeah, I'm not as familiar with that. Yep. Okay. Let's see if this works. I want to say the slice tool works. I've messed with this slice tool before, but I don't remember the details. I think that's the road that you would want to go down, is exploring that tool. But I can't just click here and do it. Let me see, slice. Maybe not. But this should work. I would just get on YouTube and Google like how to use the slice tool. Because there's some clicking I think that I need to do that I don't know what to do. But it should. I've done that before where like it'll cut it in half and give. I can't just use these other tools because it's not going to cut it in half properly. You need it to cut it in half and add in new nodes for your left half and your right half. And I think the slice tool allows for that. I just haven't used that in 10 years and can't remember the exact details for it. Anything else on the tools before we move on? Okay. Yep. Yep. It might be possible. Seems like that might be something I saw actually in InDesign as being an option. You could look into either paragraph settings and maybe find something there, or maybe character settings. It might be there, I'm not sure. Usually, that's something that if I have done it before, I do it so rarely, I'd probably just do it manually and just, I would also maybe do it once and like copy and paste that to different paragraphs just to be, I do a lot of things the lazy way. Anything else? Okay, let's jump over to talking about layers. And this is where I think Illustrator stands out from a lot of other programs. And let me show you what I mean. So at least on my screen on the right side, I've got this little toolbar here, and one of those says layers. Let's double click on that, and it's going to pop out this little layer panel. Think of layers like pieces of transparency paper where you can put certain content on one piece of paper, different content on another piece of paper, and you can stack those transparencies on top of one another to merge everything together. Or you can pull one page out at a time or delete one page. We haven't used transparencies in so long that may not be a very good example, but let's kind of just play around with it a little bit. Right now I've got all this working in one layer. Let's go down to the bottom and go to create new layer. And let's go here and we'll type in, I'm going to change that layer to text and just leave the other one as layer 1 for right now. All right, so now I've got my text, or I'll get rid of that one. This text is in one layer, this polygon is in a separate layer. Pay attention to these little eyes that are over here. This is whether or not that layer is visible or not. If I click here or click here, those layers will disappear, not be deleted, but disappear. And the key with this is keeping track of what order your layers are in. In other words, here I've got the text above layer 1. So if you look at your final output, your text is showing up above, is riding above the polygon. if I were to move these layers, just clicking and dragging and put the text on the bottom, now it's going to be hidden. Part of my text, at least, is going to be hidden behind that polygon. Now you might say, well, why in the world do I need to do layers? Why complicate stuff? Let's just keep it simple. 1,000 different reasons, you know, especially if you're working with maps. You could have a map where you've got, maybe it's a topo image, or sorry, an aerial photograph as one layer. You could have contours as a different layer. You could have some text as a third layer, and you can pick and choose what things you want to show. Maybe you want to show just the map for a PowerPoint presentation, but then print out a hard copy that has both the topo map or the topo lines and the aerial photograph together. There's also times where I might want to simplify my life and just hide all my text for a little bit and just work on the diagram or just work on the objects, but then maybe bring the text back. I can also lock these layers. If you go next to the eye and click, a little lock shows up. And that means that I can't click on that text, I can't edit that text, I can't accidentally delete that text. It's not going to go anywhere. I'll do that a lot where like I'll make a color background, maybe a black background or a red background, and I keep clicking on that background by mistake and having to unclick it. You could just put it in the layer, lock it, and you never have to worry about clicking on it by accident. And this is one of those key things, though. This goes back to like the spell check stuff. If you've got your text locked and you say type, where is it at? Or edit, go to spell checking and say do spell check. I could have had, you know, 100 typos. It's never going to catch it because that layer is locked. So be aware of that. And then you could also, if you wanted to, you could take that layer and throw it in the trash and just delete the whole layer at once. You could copy a layer if you wanted to just quickly say that. Should be a way in here somewhere to copy a layer. Oh, another useful thing is this little circle that's down here on the end. And let's say that I have, you know, maybe all of my, I don't know, all the rows that I have in a certain map are in one layer. And I need to select all the rows and change them to a different color. And maybe that magic wand isn't getting it done for me. I can also click on this little circle, and it's going to grab everything that's in that particular layer for me, and I can then edit or delete or whatever I need to. So this is like, this little thing here is like a quick grab for everything in that layer. Then you can double click on the layer, change the name. You should be able to double click here and change some other settings. I usually don't mess with this a whole lot, but those options are there. Yep. 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 Usually I try to have a plan going in where, yes, like the background is one layer, maybe text is another layer, figures are a separate layer. Sometimes it's really easy to end up in the wrong layer by mistake. And it's one of those things where this is kind of a, you know, do I need to mess with trying to fix that? There are ways to fix that. But yeah, I might, you know, a big poster for me, I might end up with 7 or 8 layers or something like that. I know some people that I think they have a layer for every single object. Yeah. I mean, it's just crazy, sub layers and layers. I'm in the middle somewhere. Yep. Yep. You can have sublayers. It will also show you. Let's add a little bit more to this. It also yeah, good point. If you expand the layer down, it's going to show you a sublayer for every object. And even within this, you can lock one particular item within that layer without locking the whole layer. Or you can make one particular item invisible, or you can select it manually this way as well. So this is, and I have used that aspect before, but I'm typically not one to manually force it to make a bunch of sublayers, but it can be done. If we've got 20 people in here, we'll do it 20 different ways, just whatever floats your boat. How about this? Let me get rid of the text layer for a minute. So now we've got one layer, but note that we still have this layering effect that's happening with these two polygons. I've got my ellipse that is covering up my rectangle. And again, I guess technically we could use the layering function for that. I could come in here and say, well, let's just drag that ellipse down, and now it's going to be in the background. That's one option. Another way of doing that would be to click on one of your objects, go up to Object, go to Arrange, and say, basically shuffle it back a little bit or shuffle it all the way to the back within that one particular layer. So I could go send to back, and it's going to throw that one all the way back. Let me show you the lazy way of doing it. And this is probably one of the more useful shortcuts that I've figured out. Everybody knows Control-C is copy, Control-V is paste, right? So let's say that I'm going to show you another way, actually teach you maybe two things at once. I want to bring this up to the front and have this in the back by using a copy and paste, an alternate copy and paste routine. If I were just to copy that polygon, that rectangle, and hit paste, it's just going to paste it right in the middle, and definitely not what I was going for. What I'm going to do instead, let me actually do a cut rather than a copy. I should have said cut. Let's do a Control X. I'm going to cut that away so it's on the clipboard. Again, I don't want to do a Control V because that's just going to throw it right in the middle. But if I do a Control F, it's going to place it, it's going to repaste it, but repaste it right back in the place that it was copied from. Which there's plenty of times where that becomes useful. You realize I need to paste something and I don't want to have to reshuffle it back to where it was. But the caveat to that, I guess, these color schemes are totally different than what I have up here. And I'm colorblind. So the thing to note, though, is by doing that cut and then paste in the original spot, I actually changed the layering without having to go up here or go over here. That's just kind of a little shortcut that I use to try to get things in the proper order. So again, I could cut that one away if I wanted to and bring it right back, and now it's on the front. Whatever you paste the last is going to be on the top of that stack of items. Here's the tool that I didn't know was here until maybe people were just laughing at me. And then eventually felt sorry for me and told me how to do it the easy way. Well, let's say I've got some objects. I need to align everything flush to the left or to the right. In the old days, I'd try to eyeball it. I think, PowerPoint, it's got this thing where it tries to auto, line stuff up for you. But let's say we're in a hurry. Again, we're trying to be more efficient with this. Let's highlight everything and then just simply go to this little align option here and just say you can center stuff, align to the right, align to the left, and so forth. So let's go horizontal align to the left, and it's going to put everything perfectly to the left. Maybe I wanted those to be equally spaced. There's also a distribute function. I can never remember which one is right, so I start clicking until it looks right. That's going to also, or not, after you've already aligned it, in that case, it's going to equally space everything for you. So I use that a lot if I'm making like a scale bar. I'll build a scale bar within Illustrator, and I can build it pretty quickly just by having all the increments spaced out just the way I want them. One thing I love about Illustrator is it seems to do a lot better job with scaling, in that if I click on this box and I say go to, where is it, view, if I go to info, it says that box is 1.9 whatever inches wide and 0.8 inches tall. If I were to send that to the printer, it's going to print it out at exactly those same dimensions, which is very handy. We can also be more precise with that if we need to. We can go up to Object and over to Transform, and we've got a bunch of functions under the Transform option. Let's go to Scale, and you can maybe say double the size if you wanted to. You can even have a little preview where it's going to show you what size it's going to jump to, and you can hit OK. You can go, let's see. Or you can click on Transform. At least on this version of Illustrator, there's another option for Transform, where I can say, let's make that box not 3.95 inches, but exactly 4 inches by exactly 2 inches. You can dial in the size of your diagrams or your objects as perfectly as you need to. You can also have those linked to where, like, if you change that to 8, it's going to automatically change the other side proportionally as well. So I've been working in inches. If you want to change that, you can double click on your, take that back. Not double click, you right click on your ruler up here. You can switch here between inches or points or millimeters, centimeters, and so forth. Yeah, I was just going to say, you should be able to go to View, then down to Rulers, and then you can either show rulers or hide rulers. There's also this change to global rulers, which I've yet to figure out what that means. there's also a, let's see, we have this grid option as well. So let's do this show grid, and it's going to kind of look like, what's that paper called? Not grid paper, is it? Graph paper. Yeah, grid paper would be too simple. It's going to kind of give you some larger increment horizontal lines and vertical lines and some finer lines as well. And if you click, typically, just freehand, it's going to be just wherever you're clicking, and it's going to be pretty rough looking final product. But if you go down here to snap to grid, this will let you basically just kind of get close to one of those points, and it's going to put it exactly on those grid marks for you precisely. You don't have to worry about holding down shift to get a straight line. You can just kind of motor around or draw whatever you need to, and it's going to step that out for you with perfect right angles, essentially. So that was go to view, and then down to snap to grid. And I actually find myself turning that off more than I do turning it on, because a lot of times I'm trying to click here and it keeps moving me over here, and it's because it's set to force it to a grid point. And to be honest, I don't use the grid a whole lot, but it is out there. Oh, here's one of the maybe more important things. Oh, another shortcut. Let me show you these two things. Control minus is going to quickly zoom out for you. Control plus is going to zoom in for you. Control 0 is going to go right back. It's going to show you the entire page all at once. You can also, let's say you're zoomed in really tight, and I want to kind of motor around. If I hold down the shift bar, I'm going to get a little hand that pops up, and that lets me kind of just hold down the shift, and I can kind of drag to a new spot, and then let go, and it returns back to my original tool. So that's kind of a quick way of getting around your, if you're making a poster, a lot of times you're zoomed in to one little part of your poster, and you're always kind of moving around. Let's go all the way out. And actually, ironically, under that hand tool, you can get to that hand tool manually over here, but if you go up under it, you've got this print tiling tool. And this is going to be helpful for when you do go to print. If you click on that, it's basically going to give you a little outline that shows where that document would, what part of that document is going to print with the current print settings. So in other words, well, that actually might be set up for borderless printing, so it totally throws off what I was going to say. When it comes down to printing, this might be, whoever prints for or helps you print. If you're not doing it yourself, they might pay more attention to this. But this can kind of help you make sure that when you send it to the printer, when you send it to the plotter, that you're not going to have sections that are going to be cut off. It ought to be pretty accurate in terms of saying anything within that dashed line is going to get printed. So if this happened to be your print border, you'd obviously want to make sure that all your artwork that you care about having printed is inside that line. Let me do something different real quick. Let me do this is just a little side note that I found to be helpful. Let's say that we do a poster that's 96 inches by 42 inches. So huge poster. And let's say that I want to print a section of that poster out just to kind of see if the font size is going to be right or this or that. Something I've used a little bit is I've used just my regular old printer, and I can move that print box around and just kind of put it in a section of the poster where I just want to print out a sample of my poster. Rather than printing out the whole 8-foot thing, just print off an 8.5 by 11 page and just kind of confirming or checking whatever I need to check. It's not perfect because that's not the same printer as you're going to send the final draft to, but it can be pretty handy. We still good? We still alive? Okay. All right. So another popular thing is using the grouping tool. So let me just make some little basic, I don't know, let's do a little tree. I'm not going to be able to do like a Bob Ross tree, but let me do a little tree. All right, so terrible looking tree, but point of this is I've made this little artwork and maybe it's just some little basic symbol. And the problem with it to start with is it's several different lines that are not grouped together. So if I wanted to move this over here, I got, it's going to move one at a time if I'm not careful, or I'd have to like select it all and move it that way. The alternative would be to select everything, which you can do a couple of ways. In this case, I could do a Control A, which is a select all, or I can just click and drag and grab everything. But I can go up to Object and then down to Group. And now everything is kind of combined together. I just have to click on any part of it and I can move it around. One thing, we've talked about importing stuff a lot. A lot of times if you import things in, it'll come, and especially if it's line art, it's going to be grouped together. You may have to go in here and ungroup it, and then that might allow you to modify it. That will definitely allow you to modify that, whatever it is, better if things are ungrouped. So you just kind of have to use that as you need to. So again, objects and group. And of course, you can copy and paste, multiple copies of that if you needed to. Let's make a better looking tree. How about that? If I go up to Object, go to Window, maybe. Let's go to Symbols. This is kind of like the clipboard, not the clipboard. The word I'm thinking, clip art. Yeah, the clip art, Illustrator style. And by default, you'll say, "What in the world? I paid $1,000 for this program. I've got 5, 6 things to choose from." Now, what you got to do is you have to come in here and say, "Go open the symbol library." And I think we want to be under Nature. We've got all these different options, flowers, maps are in here. You can import to other swatches as well. But let's go to Nature, and it's going to pop up some options. And here I've got some trees that I can use. And for symbols, I'm going to use the spray can that's right here. It's the symbol sprayer tool. And I can just, with one click, I can just kind of spray, and it's going to throw out some trees for me. And what's great about this is I can, and this is where line art or vector-based work is great. I don't know why you'd ever do it, but you could scale that whole size of your poster and print it, and it's going to be sharp as can be. It scales, as it scales in size, the resolution stays, 100% sharp all the way through that. I could come in here and do another spray tool and just keep adding, make a forest instead of just one tree. So I've got a paper published where I wanted to show like basically one map that was during the summertime, and these worked great. But I also wanted to show another map where I had the same trees, but during the wintertime. And I'm like, well, they shouldn't have leaves on them during the wintertime, so how can I get rid of the leaves? One option that you can do is click on your work, and right now you don't have any really edit options other than just smaller or bigger and so forth. But if I click on this break link, it's going to change it from being a symbol to just being regular old artwork. It shows like all the polygons that they use to make that. And this is where that ungroup option is going to come into play. But I can ungroup that work. And then now I can select on individual, well, I said I did, try ungrouping again. Sometimes you have to ungroup multiple times to get it to finally come apart. Pretty good enough. So now I can come through here and remove the leaves or whatever I wanted to that way. Yep, so highlight your image. Well, sorry. Let's bring one back. If you have a symbol in here, you've got this, again, this might be different on a different screen, but I've got this little break link option that's showing up here. And it's basically converting it from a symbol to just regular line art. Oh, so as far as like getting this library up, or yeah, so that's going to be window, and then all the way down at the bottom, he's got this window, the symbol library, and then here you can kind of pick which ones you want to populate your working thing with, your working area with. You got symbols, then you got swatches. That work? Okay, perfect. Oh yeah. So, yep. And there might be more than one way of doing that, but here's one way I know to do it. So I'm a geologist. Let's do a rock for a little bit. So I'm going to click on this rock, and then over on your toolbar, there's this little spray can looking thing that says symbol sprayer tool. If I click on that, this reminds me of the old days of paint where it'd look like spray paint on your artwork. But you just kind of click, and it's going to spray, or it's going to spray out that symbol for you. And I don't know if there's ways to, like, by default, make it a certain size. But it's not too hard just to kind of click on it, and at that point you can just expand the size if you need to, as you need, or as you see fit, I guess. And do y'all remember that magic wand tool that would like let us grab all of the leaves of the same color? You know, we could use that. Let me show you another way of doing that, if I can remember it. I'm going to click on just one of the patches of leaves. I'll go up to select, and I'll say select the same objects that have the same fill color, the same appearance, the same fill and stroke. You know, I have all these options I can choose from. So I'm going to say, let's do the same fill color. And it's going to grab everything that's a leaf like it, and you can delete it if you wanted to. Of course, these are different color leaves, so you'd have to do it separately for those. And again, that magic wand tool can do it in one click as well. And this is probably going to be the most advanced part of this. If I can remember how to do it. Yeah, so this little palette wheel that's showing up here. So here's some rocks. It doesn't matter what symbol you have, but you've got some symbol here. Click on the symbol. And I've got this little color wheel here where I can say recolor artwork. And I haven't messed with this a whole lot, but this would be the advanced way of like saying, I don't like this color scheme. Let me come in here and pick some other color schemes and kind of like redefine the color scheme that particular symbol is going to use. I'd imagine this is like this is over my head in terms of how to make this work perfectly, but I would assume that you could come here and like save some, like set up a new color scheme and like save that, and then next time you need to go back to that, you can pull it up instantly and change the color scheme if you're not happy with the default color. I know that can be done. I think I've done that a couple of times, but that's definitely not a day-to-day poster thing. We're almost done. Let me show you this. And this is one of the more powerful parts of Illustrator. Let's go to Window, and instead of symbols, let's switch over to swatches. And so symbols are going to be like, you know, a butterfly, elephant, road, whatever. A swatch is essentially going to be like a pattern for, essentially for your fill. Like instead of having just a boring brown or red or yellow, whatever, you can add some texture to it. So for swatches, let's go to patterns, basic graphics, and let's do basic graphics with dot. And this is built straight into Illustrator. This is not importing anything. But it's going to kind of give you something that should look like this, where it has, you know, maybe 20 preset options for different patterns to work with. So let me just randomly click on one of those, and you'll notice that when I clicked on that one, the fill setting within my stroke and fill has updated with that particular pattern. So now if I come over here and make a rectangle, or let's make it a square, it's going to fill perfectly with that pattern. And I can choose, you know, a totally different option. And again, this is, you know, a lot of this would work pretty well for something a geologist would do, and I'd imagine for a geographer as well. Keep in mind, this is just what's baked into Illustrator to start with. We're not. I don't think we'll get into it today. It's probably too logistically challenging. We might try it, but in that Dropbox or box folder, you're going to end up with, I've got all these swatches from the USGS that you used to be able to access. And essentially what you would do there is say, let's go to Window, Swatch Library, and let's say, well, let's try it. Let's see if it crashes the system. Other Library, and let's see if it'll pull off my jump drive. So here's the swatches, cemetery patterns. Hey, looky there, it worked. Something worked on a Friday. That doesn't happen too often. So now I have all these different patterns to choose from. And if I were to draw a box now, well, that wasn't a very exciting pattern. Let me try to find a different pattern. Twisting my luck on a Friday. I did the wrong thing. I did. There, that's the one I wanted. Yeah, now we're talking. Okay, so here is symbol, maybe some type of a limestone, some type of a double stone. What's great about this is you can scale this up, and it's going to be nice. It's line art. It's going to be nice and perfect in terms of you know, how crisp it is and everything like that. I'm sorry. I typically don't deal with that, but my class, I do make them like a little strat column, and it's, the whole exercise is to get them to use this within Illustrator. There's probably a better, there might be something better out there, but this works. The rare times I use this, it works perfectly for me. Yep. Yep, yep, yep. I don't know. Yeah, 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 yeah. And I should note that there is a, well, I probably won't pull it up, but within that folder, there's also a PDF that is going to like kind of be a summary of what all is there. It's going to, like right here, it's not saying, you know, it just says SIT64. What does that mean? It has the code of SIT64 is, yeah, whatever. And this has everything. I mean, there's metamorphic rocks, cemetery rocks, igneous rocks. This is obviously for like cross section, but you would have stuff in there for map view as well. Swampy areas, this and that. There's a whole lot of information there, so definitely use like your search tool to get through that PDF. But it has everything laid. It even has like some little palettes where it shows like all the cemetery rocks with a summary of here's the rock, here's the name, here's the number that goes to it, rather than having to sit here and pick and choose and try to guess. Another option, and this is where we need to go back to that transform setting. We've got this little scale here. Now, I didn't mention this much, but let's undo the preview for a second. Let's say that I don't like the the size of that swatch as it is. Maybe everything seems too compact, too small. I can get in here and say, well, let's increase the scale by 200%. And let's say scale the strokes and effects. Nope, that's not what I want. Transform patterns, preview. Ought to be some way where I can do the whole, where the whole pattern. Let's see what happens. No, didn't do anything. Oh, hold on, didn't they do it just now? I have found that this to be a little bit finicky for some reason, no matter the version. Like sometimes it'll take the change and sometimes it doesn't. So like here now, maybe if I do, let's do 300%. And it's kind of, yeah, click around a little bit. It'll keep the object size the same, but it's changed the size of that within the swatch itself. Or you might want to scale it down, to 25% or something like that. To whatever you, you're going to have a default size that comes with the software pack or with the swatch from the USGS, but you can modify that. And yes. Yep. So I click on your box and then go up to Object and over to Transform and then down to Scale. Several clicks to get there, unfortunately. And then you can tweak it as you need or as you see fit. What about transform and then rotate? Rocks tend to dip. Maybe you want to show that in your map. Let's say they're dipping at 18 degrees. And again, this is object, transform, and rotate. You can tell it to transform the patterns as well. Or you can say transform the object, but keep the patterns unaltered. So you can go back and you can change everything or change one or the other if you want to. You just have to kind of pay attention to which buttons you have selected. And keep in mind, it can be finicky in terms of sometimes I hit preview and it previews, and sometimes I hit preview and it doesn't, and all that. And maybe might be the last thing. We can just open the floor up for whatever after that. But let's see if I remember how to add. I can spruce this up a little bit if I wanted to by adding some color back behind here. Let's see if I remember how to do that. Let's go to Window. Appearance, okay. So this is a little bit more advanced, but here is this appearance window that's popping up. And it is specific for whatever object I have selected. So here it's got, this is kind of like some little sub-layers built into it, but it kind of shows, hey, I've got a pattern here, I've got some stroke information. I could turn off that fill just like you could a layer. But let's try to add a new layer. But within that layer, instead of it having a pattern, let's give it a color. And so now I've basically very easily added some color. I guess some of these are preset with colors, but some of them don't have colors. And there are ways to work around that. But I found this to be the most efficient way is to, again, go up to Window, Appearance, and add a new layer, and I can add essentially more, I can almost build my own swatch to some extent and customize it. And again, you should be able to dial in that color, as precisely as you would like. Yeah, I think we've hit pretty much everything I kind of had laid out here. I guess a couple things to note. One is notice that, we maybe tapped into 5% of what Illustrator can do. And that's kind of why I've put things like this together and I've had this class put together so that we can just focus on the 10% that we need and ignore the fluff for now and hopefully reduce some of the time it takes to get all this work done. Do y'all have any questions? No matter if it's swatches or general presentation stuff in general? Yeah. Yep. 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 So what did you export as? Yep. So PNG is going to be a raster file, and JPEG is raster file, TIFF is raster file, and essentially you're basically saying, I'm going to divide this up into a bunch of cells, and every cell is going to have a color value. And you can ramp up that resolution. That's going to help a little bit, but it's still going to, if you zoom in enough, it's still going to be pixelated. A couple options. One is if you have to go to a raster file, just make sure that you're going to a high enough resolution that it's going to be sufficient for whatever if you're doing a presentation or printing it out. Or for a manuscript, a lot of times the manuscript will have a guide that says line art needs to be exported as a TIFF at 1,000 dpi or something like that. Another option would be to find a export that's not a raster file. Export as a PDF, export as an EPS. Things like I'm sure there's some other vector files out there. Because the vector file, all it's doing is saying, it's just saving the geometry. It's just saying, we've got a point that starts, or a line that starts here and it goes here. It saves the geometry data to redraw that line, and you can zoom in as much as you want to, and it's going to stay perfectly sharp. So, short answer is try to find a vector export option. I keep it as AI. There were days, or in the years past, I'll convert it to an EPS file, and that was an attempt, similar to a PDF, but it was an attempt to try to make sure all my data made it to the plotter in the right format. But that's probably overly cautious having to do that. Now I just do it as an Illustrator file. But I'm using those tips that are in that I'm using there are some things in here that I'm doing that are making that process a lot smoother. And there's things in here in terms of, like, if you have like a poster that you've made And if you have like just some random point off the side that's like outside of your artwork, on our plotter, it'll just sit there and send to the printer for hours, and it will never send it. It can't handle that point being outside the dot. So it's just, hey, make sure you check like unlock everything, look for random points, make sure all your artwork is actually within your artboard. And that way when you hit print, it's going to spool properly and print. Yep. So Jim Donahoe is the guy that works in our lab, or works in geology. He actually handles most of the printing, and I know he's run into issues with printing from PDF. I can't remember exactly what the issue was. It might have been, it seems like it was more of like like it took longer to print. And I don't know if it's like the file size just ramps up, or if for some reason the PDF doesn't go to the plotter as quickly as the Illustrator file does. I think he's running into more of just the time it takes than like you're losing information or something like that. I do remember he ran into that grayscale issue that I've mentioned. I think he printed a poster off 3 times on photo paper until he got it right. Yeah, and I think that was a PDF where somehow even, I mean, PDF, the whole idea of PDF is it can open on anything, anywhere, and even that, it still had issues with that grayscale image. So, yeah, I don't think PDF is bad. And keep in mind, our plotter is probably 15, 20 years old. And I know we need a new plotter, and that might solve a lot of the hiccups as well. What else? Yep. 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 One thing I did not show, let's see how it works with this. Have you worked with a clipping mask before? Does that ring a bell? Okay. That's one of my, I didn't have it in here, but it's one of I teach it to my class. It's one of the most helpful things that I do. Let's see how it handles this. Let's say I'm just trying, I want, for whatever reason, I want to remove a section of this, hide it. Clipping mask is something, it's better it's shown than trying to explain it. But what I need to do, first off, I've got this that I want to keep. I've got maybe this corner I want to get rid of, and I'm going to use this to kind of cover up the portion I'm trying to remove. Let me select both objects, go to Object, Clipping Mask, then Make. And it actually did it backwards. And that makes sense. I didn't do that right. All right, so let's try this the other way around. Let's say if I wanted to do it the proper way, now I could do something like that. It's going to retain, I said that wrong earlier, it's going to retain everything within this polygon, and anything outside of that polygon is going to get removed. So I have to highlight everything, or both objects, go again to Object, Clipping Mask, and Make. and it's going to throw that out and keep everything. There's no deformation or anything like that. What I use this for a lot is, like, let's say I've got a picture of a fossil, and I took a picture of the fossil, and the fossil looks great, but it's on this dirty workspace. I'm trying to give a nice polished presentation. I could use that to I could come in here, trace around my fossil, and let's say that behind this is my beautiful fossil and all this is just clutter. I could highlight all that, go to Object, Clipping Mask, and Make, and it's going to just show the fossil and everything else gets thrown out. You could also do something similar to that in Photoshop. Would be your best spot, and that's where you'd be like kind of like erasing the background, and it's just kind of more than one with Illustrator and all of the Adobe stuff. There's multiple ways of doing the same thing. It kind of depends on which way you're most comfortable with. But I use that clipping mask a lot because there's always times where I just want to let me just show just this or just that and clean stuff up. All right, what else? I'd see. Maybe not the brush, but I can show a little bit. It's funny, the stuff that once people realize Illustrator, you end up doing. My in-laws are growing chickens in their backyard right now, so I did a logo for their farm, and got into using some of the stuff where, let's say that I've got my line here, just this kind of basic line. I do have some options up here to where I can get into some more artistic shape or patterns for those lines where it's not just a just a straight line. And same idea here. You've got a couple that are shown as presets, but I can go in here and get charcoal pencil options out here, and do a bunch of things like that. And this is something that legitimately might be a good thing to do, like if you're like trying to create like a separation between one section of a poster and another, rather than just having a straight line. You could add something like that to just break it up a little bit. But yeah, for the brush itself, I just have to sit here and try to play with it. I mean, it's like it's right off the bat, I'm not totally sure the difference between it and the pen tool seems to be, or pencil tool seems to be behaving the same. So obviously there is some difference, or else it wouldn't be a separate tool. Again, as far as like exporting, I mean, and if you have your poster or whatever looking great here, let's say you're going to a PowerPoint. I'm using this for PowerPoint presentations all the time. I fine tune it here, get it over to PowerPoint. Again, I talked earlier about doing a screenshot. You can also do the export, and you save those different formats. Export for web, which works really well for PowerPoints. Should also have here's where you can get to your vector-based formats. PDFs would be vector-based, EPS is vector-based. I'm not sure about SVG. But as far as I'm concerned, I guess Illustrator is the industry standard for a lot of this stuff. There's a whole lot of functionality to it. But again, it can be pretty overwhelming to to get into it. Pretty sure the export options are going to vary based on what format you're working with. So if you do an export as and go to TIFF, let's see if it gives us any options. Yeah. So with TIFF, it's going to say, do you want it to be in CMYK or RGB? I can't really tell a difference, but in general, CMYK is for something you wanted to print. If you never went to the print mode and stayed only on a screen, RGB would be the best shot. But here is where you can say, just some default resolutions, or you can come in here and manually type in the resolution that you need. I know a lot of manuscripts will say it has to be a TIFF and it has to be 1000 DPI or something like that. And a lot of this is over my head in terms of exactly what it. Some of the more advanced settings I'm not totally sure about. All right, what else? Anything? Okay. Like I said, you ought to have several things coming to you maybe by the end of today. We can make that happen, I guess. Load everything up there. Okay. So it should be the PowerPoint. It's going to be this that we talked through, and there's some stuff I skipped over. It's kind of trivial stuff. I have like everything typed up on how to do it. The printing guide, the USGS swatches, and then the little packet about the UA logos and all that protocol. So hopefully that'll be some good use.